Emily Carter stared at the fourth past due notice this month, the red letters swimming before her tired eyes. Outside her apartment window, Portland's winter rain tapped a steady rhythm against the glass, matching the pounding in her temples. At 26, this wasn't where she'd imagined herself, a talented graphic designer, reduced to living in a 450-square-foot apartment where the heater rattled louder than her thoughts. Just one more week, she whispered to herself, scrolling through her bank app. Her next client payment should clear by Friday, enough to cover rent, and maybe, if she was careful, groceries that didn't come from the dollar store. The irony wasn't lost on her. Emily Carter, daughter of Robert and Victoria Carter of the Westbrook Heights, Carter's eating ramen for the third night in a row, while her design for the Thompson Gallery's winter showcase earned rave reviews. Her mother would be mortified. Then again, her mother was often mortified by Emily's choices. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Speaking of mortification, her mother had tagged her in another family photo. Emily swiped to open Instagram, already knowing what she'd find. Victoria Carter's profile was a masterclass in curated perfection. Today's post showed her parents clinking champagne glasses on their recently purchased yacht. "Making memories with my love-blessed and retirement goals," Emily snorted. The only thing her father loved more than his investment portfolio was the sound of his own voice telling Emily how to live her life. And retirement, Robert Carter would sooner die than stop working. Controlling things was too much a part of who he was. Her thumb hovered over the like button out of habit, then paused. Instead, she closed the app and tossed her phone onto the second-hand couch beside her. The springs groaned in protest, much like Emily's soul every time her parents offered helpful advice about her career choices. "Independence builds character," her father loved to say, usually right after posting photos of their latest European vacation. "You should learn how to manage money like adults do," her mother would add with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. The only person who had never made Emily feel small was her grandfather, William Bill Carter. Unlike his son Robert, Grandpa Bill had built his real estate development company from nothing with calloused hands and honest work. He understood the value of dreams that weren't measured in dollars and cents. Emily's gaze drifted to the small framed photo on her desk, her and Grandpa Bill at her college graduation, his weathered face beaming with genuine pride while her parents stood stiffly in the background, already critiquing her art degree. "You've got the eye, Emmy," he told her that day, using his special nickname for her. "You see things others miss. That's worth more than any business degree." 4 years later, at her 22nd birthday dinner, he'd leaned over with a conspiratorial whisper. "Someday I'll make sure you have a place of your own. A real place somewhere your light can shine." Emily had smiled, assuming he meant advice, or perhaps a small loan someday. Grandpa Bill was generous but practical, a planner who believed in solid foundations rather than flashy gestures. It was one of the many ways he differed from his son. A sharp knock at her door startled Emily from her memories. Her landlord, Mrs. Finch, stood in the hallway, arms crossed over her floral housecoat. "Your ceiling leak is back," she announced without preamble. "The Hendersons upstairs said their bathroom floor is feeling spongy." Emily sighed. "I'll put a bucket under it again. When is the plumber coming?" Mrs. Finch shrugged bony shoulders. "When you pay last month's rent in full, I'll call him again." The door closed before Emily could respond. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood and exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about money. This was about dignity, about carving out a space in the world where she could create without judgment or interference. What she wouldn't give for a studio of her own, a place with proper light, and no neighbor's footsteps overhead, no mold in the corners, no parents' expectations seeping through the walls like toxic fumes. "Someday," she whispered to herself. Someday. A week before Christmas, Emily was hunched over her tablet at Rain City Cafe, her regular workplace, when the apartment walls started closing in. The coffee shop hummed with holiday chatter, but Emily barely noticed, lost in the logo redesign she was creating for a local bakery. Her phone vibrated against the wooden table. Grandpa Bill's face lit up the screen. Emily smiled and slipped her earbuds in. "Hey, Grandpa, how's the snow up there?" His warm chuckle filled her ears. 6 inches and counting. The lake's starting to freeze over." Grandpa Bill had semi-retired to his cabin on Lake Oswego 5 years ago, though he still kept an office in Portland where he handled the interesting projects, as he called them. "You sound good," Emily said, noting the energy in his voice. At 72, William Carter remained more vibrant than most people half his age. "I feel good, Emmy. There was something in his tone, a hint of mischief, that made Emily sit up straighter. "That's why I'm calling. This year I have a special gift for you." Emily laughed. "Grandpa, you don't have to get me anything." "Oh, it's already done," he replied, a strange certainty in his voice. "You've been working hard. It's time things started working for you." Something about his words made her pulse quicken. "What does that mean?" "It means Christmas dinner at my place, same as always. Your parents are flying in from Napa on the 23rd. He paused. "And Emmy, wear something nice. This year's worth celebrating properly." After they hung up, Emily stared at her phone, puzzled. Grandpa Bill wasn't one for surprises or cryptic statements. He was solid, dependable, the foundation the Carters had built everything on. Was that the famous grandfather? Emily looked up to find Rachel sliding into the chair across from her, setting down 2 fresh coffees. Rachel had been Emily's best friend since art school, the one person who understood both Emily's talent and her family dynamics. "Yeah, and he was acting weird." Emily took a grateful sip of the latte. "Said he has some big surprise gift for me." Rachel's eyebrows rose. "Maybe he's finally cutting your parents out of the will," she joked, but there was an edge to her voice. Rachel had witnessed too many post-family dinner meltdowns not to harbor some resentment toward Robert and Victoria Carter. "Don't even joke," Emily groaned. "My dad would have a coronary and then Mom would blame me for killing him." "So what do you think it is, the surprise I mean?" Emily shrugged, returning to her design work. "Knowing Grandpa, probably some practical wisdom wrapped in a bow, or maybe he found me a new client." Rachel studied her friend's face. "You don't seem excited." "I'm just tired." Emily didn't look up from her tablet. "Been pulling all-nighters to finish the Henderson wedding invitations." "Speaking of," Rachel nudged Emily's coffee closer to her, "how's the new business plan coming?" Emily had been talking about launching her own design studio for years, Carter Creatives, but something always held her back. Money mostly. Fear, if she was being honest with herself. "I've got the portfolio ready," Emily said. "Just need to save up for a decent website and maybe some actual office space that isn't a corner of a coffee shop. Or your apartment with the interesting ceiling features. The latest leak is actually a design element. Very avant-garde indoor rain." They both laughed, but Emily's mind drifted back to her grandfather's call. Later that night, scrolling through her phone before bed, she paused on her mother's latest post, a gleaming dinner table set for 12, crystal sparkling under custom lighting. "Hosting the Vineyard Association tonight, family is everything. Blessed Napa Valley. Family is everything." The words felt hollow, performative, like most things her mother touched. Emily's finger hovered over the comment button, tempted to type, "Miss you too, Mom." But what was the point? The post wasn't really about family. It was about the image of family. That night, Emily dreamed of houses with doors that wouldn't open, windows too high to reach, and rooms that shifted when she tried to enter them. In the dream, she could hear Grandpa Bill calling her name, but every time she moved toward his voice, the walls would change. She woke at dawn unsettled with the strange feeling that something important was about to happen. 3 days before Christmas, Emily was searching for a client's invoice on her laptop when an unfamiliar email caught her eye. The subject line read, "Confirmation of successful sale of Pacific Lane property." She almost deleted it as spam, but something made her pause. Pacific Lane. Why did that sound familiar? Emily opened the email and scanned the contents, her confusion growing with each line. "Dear Ms. Adams, thank you for your interest in the former Carter property at 1842 Pacific Lane. As requested, I'm confirming that the sale was finalized on March 15th, 3 years ago. The transaction records show the property was transferred from the original buyer, Emily Carter, to Thomas Carter, with all proceeds directed to the account specified in the transfer agreement. If you have further questions about the current market value of similar properties in the Lake Oswego area, please don't hesitate to contact our office. Best regards, Stephanie Donahue, Adams & Polk Real Estate." Emily read the email 3 times, her hands growing cold. Pacific Lane. Now she remembered that was the street Grandpa Bill had mentioned years ago during a drive around Lake Oswego. "That's where the light is perfect," he'd said, pointing to a row of craftsman-style homes nestled among tall pines. "Morning light for the early birds, afternoon gold for the dreamers." Her throat tightened. Pacific Lane. Her name on a property deed. A sale she knew nothing about. And Thomas Carter, her father's formal name, the one he used for legal documents. Emily's fingers trembled as she dialed her mother's number. Victoria picked up on the 3rd ring, the sounds of a busy kitchen in the background. Emily, is everything all right? I'm in the middle of prepping for a "Hey, Mom," Emily interrupted, working to keep her voice casual. Random question. Did Grandpa ever buy a house on Pacific Lane? The silence that followed lasted 2 beats too long. Pacific Lane. Victoria's tone shifted too light, too controlled. Why do you ask? Just curious. I got this weird email. An email. The sharpness in her mother's voice was unmistakable now. Emily, you know better than to open things that aren't meant for you. These spam emails get more clever every day. But it mentioned my name. Sweetheart, listen. Victoria's voice softened, though Emily could hear the strain. That Pacific Lane business, that was years ago. Your grandfather had this notion about buying some property there, but the market crashed that year. Nothing ever came of it. Robert handled everything. Emily's grip tightened on her phone. So there was never a house in my name. Another pause. Of course not. Where are you getting these ideas? You know how your grandfather exaggerates sometimes. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that Emily might have believed it if not for the email still open on her screen. Right, Emily said slowly. I guess I misunderstood. Well, that's settled then. Now I really must go. The caterers need direction, and you know how your father gets when dinner is delayed. We'll see you at Bill's on Christmas Eve. Victoria hung up before Emily could respond. The apartment suddenly felt too small, the walls too close. Her mother's voice played on repeat in her mind, each word, now suspect, examined for hidden meanings and half-truths. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Every creak in her apartment felt like a whisper saying they lied. The rain against her window sounded like accusations. By morning, she had made a decision. If her family wouldn't give her the truth, she would find it herself. The offices of Adams & Polk Real Estate stood on the corner of Main and 3rd, a tastefully modern building with large windows displaying photos of Portland's most desirable properties. Emily pushed through the glass doors, her heart pounding beneath her professional smile. She had dressed carefully for this meeting, black slacks, emerald blouse, the pearl earrings Grandpa Bill had given her for graduation. She needed to look like someone who belonged in conversations about real estate transactions. At the reception desk, a young woman with a sleek ponytail looked up expectantly. Welcome to Adams & Polk. How can I help you? I have an appointment with Stephanie Donahue, Emily said, the lie rolling smoothly off her tongue. Emily Carter. The receptionist checked her screen, frowning slightly. I don't see you in the system. Let me call her. A few minutes later, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair emerged from a hallway, hand extended. Ms. Carter, Stephanie Donahue. Caitlin says you wanted to see me. Emily shook her hand firmly. Yes, thank you for making time. It's about a property on Pacific Lane, 1842. I believe your office handled the transaction a few years ago. Stephanie's professional smile remained in place as she led Emily to a small conference room. Yes, that was one of mine. Lovely craftsman, excellent location. Are you related to the buyers? Actually, Emily said, measuring each word, I believe I was the original owner, but I'm having trouble accessing my records from the sale. I was hoping you might have copies. Stephanie studied Emily's face. Original owner, the property was purchased by William Carter and placed in the name of Emily Carter. Then it was sold approximately 3 months later to Thomas Carter. She tilted her head. If you're Emily Carter, I'm a bit confused why you'd need records of your own transaction. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. So it was true. The house had been real. Her name had been on the deed, and her father had somehow sold it out from under her. It's complicated, Emily managed. Family business arrangements. I'm just trying to piece together the timeline. Stephanie nodded slowly, clearly, not entirely convinced. Well, I can't release actual documents without proper authorization, but I can confirm the sale date was March 15th, 3 years ago. The purchase price was $875,000, and the sale price to Thomas Carter was $920,000, reflecting a small market uptick during that quarter. Nearly $1 million. Emily struggled to keep her expression neutral while her mind reeled. Her grandfather had spent almost $1 million on a house for her, a house she'd never seen, never lived in, never even known existed until now. The sale was handled rather quickly. Stephanie continued, watching Emily carefully. Thomas Carter presented power of attorney documentation. Everything seemed in order, though I remember thinking it was unusual for a property to change hands so soon after purchase. Power of attorney. Emily felt sick. Had her grandfather given her father legal authority to manage his affairs? Or had something more sinister happened? "Do you happen to know who's living there now?" Emily asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the turmoil inside. "I believe Thomas Carter sold it about a year after his purchase. I didn't handle that transaction." On her way out, Emily paused in front of the property displays. A familiar street name caught her eye, Pacific Lane. A different house, but the same tree-lined street. The listing described it as a creative's paradise with studio space and natural light throughout. Outside, the cold air hit Emily's flushed face. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "How'd it go? Find anything?" Emily stared at the screen, unsure how to compress the magnitude of what she'd discovered into a text message. Instead, she started the car and drove following the GPS directions to Lake Oswego, to Pacific Lane. She needed to see at the house that should have been hers, the house her family had stolen. When Emily finally turned onto Pacific Lane, her breath caught. The street was everything Grandpa Bill had described: gracious craftsman-style homes set back from the road, tall pines and maples creating a natural canopy. Even in winter, she could see why he'd talked about the light. The afternoon sun filtered through bare branches, casting golden patterns across front porches and wide windows. She slowed as she approached number 1442, a 2-story blue-gray house with white trim and a deep front porch. Stone steps led up to a solid oak door with leaded glass panels. The yard was immaculate even in December, with evergreen shrubs and winter blooms adding color against the snow-dusted lawn. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was exactly the kind of place where Emily had always imagined establishing her design studio. And it had been hers for 3 months that she never knew about. Emily parked across the street, watching as a young family emerged from the front door, a woman about her age holding an infant, a man carrying a toddler on his shoulders. They looked happy, settled. This was their home now, built on a foundation of her family's lies. That night, back in her apartment with its leaking ceiling and rattling heater, Emily called Rachel. "They sold it," she said flatly when her friend answered. "They took what was mine and told Grandpa I had it." Rachel was silent for a moment, then, "So what are you going to do?" Emily looked at her reflection in the darkened window, a ghostly image overlaid with Portland's city lights. In that moment, she didn't recognize herself, or perhaps she was seeing herself clearly for the first time. The woman in the glass looked determined, focused, unafraid. "I'm going to Christmas dinner," she said. What Rachel couldn't see was the folder Emily had placed on her kitchen table, printouts of the email notes from her conversation with Stephanie Donahue and the address of Mark Steele, her grandfather's longtime attorney. Christmas was 4 days away. 4 days to uncover the full truth. 4 days to prepare for the moment when everything would change. What Emily couldn't know was that this Christmas dinner had been set in motion long before she ever received that email, a collision course years in the making with consequences none of them could predict. 2 days before Christmas, Portland's sky hung low with bruised clouds that threatened snow instead of the usual rain. Emily pulled her car into the reserved visitor space at Carter Development, the gleaming glass building that housed her grandfather's company. Though semi-retired, William Bill Carter still kept an office on the top floor, a corner suite with views of the river and mountains beyond. Emily sat for a moment, gathering her courage. The small wrapped package on the passenger seat, a vintage compass she'd found at an antique store, was just a pretense. What she really wanted couldn't be wrapped in paper and ribbon. The truth. The lobby was decorated with tasteful holiday garlands, the receptionist wearing a subtle pin of holly on her lapel. "Emily, what a lovely surprise. The woman greeted her warmly. Marge had been with the company for 30 years and had watched Emily grow up. "Hi, Marge. Is Grandpa in?" "I'm afraid not, dear. Board meeting downtown. But Sarah's up there if you want to leave something for him." Perfect. Sarah Evans had been Grandpa Bill's executive assistant for the past decade, organized, discreet, and fiercely loyal. If anyone knew the details of the Pacific Lane property, it would be Sarah. "Thanks, I'll do that." The elevator ride to the 14th floor gave Emily time to rehearse her approach. Casual, curious, not accusatory, not yet. Sarah looked up from her computer as Emily entered the outer office. Something flickered in her eyes, recognition followed by what Emily could have sworn was guilt. "Emily, what a surprise." Sarah stood smoothing her charcoal pencil skirt. "Your grandfather didn't mention you were coming by." Just dropping off his gift early, Emily replied, raising the small wrapped box. Her fingers trembled slightly, the only outward sign of her inner turmoil. I won't be able to do it tomorrow. Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's thoughtful. I'll make sure he gets it. Emily placed the package on Sarah's desk, but didn't move toward the door. Instead, she glanced around the office, taking in the familiar furnishings and the photos on the wall, including one of herself at her art school graduation, standing between Grandpa Bill and Sarah. How's he doing, really? Emily asked softly. Sometimes I think he doesn't tell me everything, trying to protect me. Sarah's posture changed subtly, a slight stiffening of her shoulders. He's doing well, especially now that he knows you're settled. Settled, Emily echoed. Sarah hesitated, then lowered her voice. Mr. Carter talks about how proud he is that you finally have your own place, the one on Pacific Lane. For a moment the words didn't register. Then they hit with the force of a physical blow. Emily managed to keep her expression neutral, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Pacific Lane, she repeated slowly. Sarah nodded, whispering now. He bought it 2 years ago. Said it was in your name. Said your parents handled all the paperwork. Her eyes softened with something like pity. He really believes you've been living there. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Emily's feet. 2 years ago. But the realtor had said 3 years. The timeline wasn't adding up. Can I see something? Emily asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the chaos inside. Sarah hesitated again, glancing toward the closed door of Bill's inner office. Then she quietly slid open the bottom drawer of her desk and extracted a manila folder. I shouldn't be showing you this, she murmured. But something hasn't felt right for a while now. Inside the folder was a photocopy of the original deed, Emily's name bold and unmistakable at the top, and stapled behind it another form, a transfer of ownership with Robert Carter's signature. The date on the deed was indeed 2 years ago, not 3 as the realtor had said. The final document in the folder made Emily's breath catch a handwritten note from Grandpa Bill dated last Christmas. Emmy, your first year in your own place. So proud of you for making it yours. This key opens the antique writing desk in the front room. A small housewarming gift to replace the one you mentioned was damaged in the move. Love, Grandpa? Emily swallowed hard, trying to dislodge the lump in her throat. She'd never received the note, never gotten the key, never seen the writing desk. He had it delivered to Pacific Lane, Sarah said softly, watching Emily's face. Your father assured him you received it. And my grandfather, he thinks I've been living there all this time for 2 years. Sarah nodded, her eyes troubled. Your parents told him you wanted to make it your own before showing it to anyone, that you were renovating the studio space. She paused. Mr. Carter was hurt you hadn't invited him over, but Robert convinced him you needed time and space to be independent. The cruel elegance of the deception took Emily's breath away. Her parents had used her own desire for independence against her, twisting it to keep Grandpa Bill from discovering their betrayal. Outside, the cold air hit Emily like punishment. She sat in her car, gripping the papers until they crumpled. The steering wheel felt like the only solid thing in a world suddenly made of shadows and lies. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Don't forget to bring that cranberry salad Grandpa likes for Christmas dinner hearts. Emily stared at the screen, numb with rage and grief. How many other texts like this had she received over the years? How many smiling emojis and heart symbols had masked the theft of her future? As she pulled away from the Carter Development Building, Emily no longer felt uncertain about what to do next. She knew exactly where she needed to go. The offices of Steele and Associates occupied a renovated Victorian in Portland's Pearl District. Unlike the sleek modernity of her grandfather's building, Mark Steele's law firm embraced its historical roots, dark wood paneling, brass fixtures, and the faint smell of leather-bound books. Emily had called ahead using her grandfather's name to secure an immediate appointment. She'd known Mark Steele her entire life. He'd attended every Carter family Christmas, handled her grandfather's legal affairs for decades, and had even helped Emily set up her LLC when she first started freelancing. What she didn't know was whether he was part of the deception. The receptionist led her directly to Steele's office, a corner room with tall windows that today offered views of snowflakes beginning to swirl against a darkening sky. Mark Steele rose from behind his massive oak desk, his silver hair and beard giving him the look of a distinguished sea captain. At 68, he remained imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. Emily, he said warmly, gesturing to a leather chair. This is unexpected. Everything all right with Bill? That depends, Emily replied, sitting down and placing the folder on his desk. On how much you know about 1842 Pacific Lane. Steele's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a wariness that confirmed Emily's suspicions that he wasn't entirely in the dark. I see. He settled back in his chair. And what exactly are you asking me, Emily? I'm asking if you knew that my grandfather bought me a house 2 years ago, a house I never knew existed until yesterday, a house that was in my name but was somehow sold by my father. She leaned forward. I'm asking if you, as my grandfather's attorney and trusted friend, were aware of this deception. Steele was silent for a long moment, studying her face. Then he sighed deeply. Not in the way you think, he said finally. I drew up the original transfer of property from Bill to you. It was meant to be a surprise for your 24th birthday, but Bill decided to wait for the right moment to tell you he wanted to make sure you wouldn't feel obligated to move in if you weren't ready. And the sale to my father. Steele's mouth tightened. That was irregular. Robert presented power of attorney documents giving him authority to manage your affairs. The paperwork appeared to be in order, notarized and filed correctly. He claimed you had authorized him to sell the property because you preferred a different location. I never signed any power of attorney, Emily said flatly. I had suspicions, Steele admitted. But without evidence of fraud and with your father insisting you were aware of the transaction, he spread his hands. The sale went through. Emily's hands clenched in her lap. And you never thought to ask me directly? By the time I learned of the sale, it was already completed. I questioned Robert about it, and he assured me you had requested the sale because you weren't ready for property ownership. Steele's eyes narrowed. When I suggested contacting you to confirm he was convincing that this would undermine your confidence, make you feel as though I didn't trust your decisions. The manipulation was so characteristic of her father that Emily almost laughed. Of course, he would twist concern into doubt protection, into control. So what happened to the money from the sale? Nearly $1 million, where did it go? Steele reached for his computer keyboard. Let me check something. After a few minutes of typing and clicking, his expression grew grim. The proceeds were directed to an account in your name at First Western Bank, but according to these records, that account was emptied via transfer just 1 week later. Let me guess, Emily said, her voice hollow. Transferred to my parents' account. Not directly. It went to Carter Family Holdings, a shell company your father established that same month. Steele looked up, his eyes troubled. Emily, this is looking more and more like deliberate fraud. It gets worse, Emily said, pushing the folder toward him. My grandfather thinks I've been living in the house all this time. My parents have maintained this fiction for 2 years, intercepting gifts, making excuses for why I never invited him over, pretending to pass messages between us about the property. Twist number 4, Steele pulled up another screen and grimaced. And it appears the money ultimately funded the purchase of a vacation property in Napa Valley, purchased by Robert and Victoria Carter 18 months ago. 5-bedroom estate with vineyard views. The vineyard, the Instagram posts, the dinner parties, all paid for with Emily's stolen house. What can we do? Emily asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside. Steele leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Legally, we have options. This is clear fraud, potentially criminal. But pursuing that path would devastate your grandfather, seeing his son arrested, family business in the papers. I don't want to hurt Grandpa, Emily said softly. I just want the truth to come out. I want my parents to face what they've done. Then perhaps, Steele said slowly, the best approach is to let them expose themselves. He studied her for a moment. Christmas dinner is when? 2 days from now, at Grandpa's lake house. Steele nodded thoughtfully. I've received my usual invitation. Your grandfather always invites me for dessert and brandy. His blue eyes glinted with something like anticipation. This year I believe I'll arrive a bit earlier. As Emily stood to leave, Steele came around his desk and placed a hand on her shoulder. Emily, there's something else you should know. Your grandfather has been updating his will. The bulk of his estate, including controlling interest in Carter Development, is designated for you, not your father. Bill has had concerns about Robert's judgment for some time now. Emily felt the weight of this revelation settle over her. So her father's betrayal wasn't just about one house, it was about fear of losing everything. Does my father know about the will? He suspects. Bill has been gradually reducing Robert's authority in the company over the past year. Steele's expression was grave. which makes the timing of all this significant. Robert and Victoria may be trying to secure what they can before the inevitable. Outside, snow was falling in earnest, now transforming Portland's streets into a glittering wonderland that felt jarringly at odds with the ugliness Emily had uncovered. "You're not alone in this, Emily," Steele said as he walked her to the door. "I've known your grandfather for 40 years. He values truth above all things, even family loyalty. Remember that." As Emily drove away, the pieces were finally falling into place. The mystery wasn't just about a stolen house anymore. It was about a family built on appearances, a father terrified of losing control, and a reckoning long overdue. What her parents didn't know what they couldn't know was that their carefully constructed facade was about to shatter, and Emily would be the one holding the hammer. The day before Christmas dawned clear and cold sunlight sparkling off fresh snow that had fallen through the night. Emily stood at her apartment window, watching her breath fog the glass as her mind churned with competing emotions. Righteous anger. That was easiest to identify, a hot, clarifying fury that burned away uncertainty. Her parents had stolen from her, lied to her grandfather, and built their lavish lifestyle on the foundation of that betrayal. But beneath the anger lay something more complicated. Grief for the relationship with her parents that now seemed irrevocably broken. Doubt about whether confrontation was the right path. And a whisper of fear, not of her parents' reaction, but of how this revelation would affect Grandpa Bill. She'd barely slept her dreams, haunted by that house on Pacific Lane, rooms she'd never seen, hallways. She'd never walked light, filtering through windows that should have been hers. In her dreams, she could hear her grandfather calling her name, but she couldn't find him. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Coming over with emergency coffee and bagels. Don't argue." 20 minutes later, they sat on Emily's lumpy couch, steam rising from massive mugs, while Rachel listened to the full story, Sarah's revelations. Mark Steele's confirmation, the Napa Valley connection. "Holy shit," Rachel said when Emily finished. "It's like some twisted Lifetime movie." She shook her head. "But I'm not surprised. Your dad has always given me major control freak vibes." Emily sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I keep trying to understand why they did it. $1 million is a lot, but my parents aren't hurting for money. Dad's company is successful. They have investments. Why steal from me?" Rachel's expression turned thoughtful. "Maybe it's not about the money. Maybe it's about what the house represented." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Your grandfather bypassed your father completely to give you that house. He put it in your name, not Robert's. That's a pretty clear statement about who he trusts." Emily had never considered this angle. "You think Dad was jealous. I think your father has spent his entire life trying to be worthy of your grandfather's legacy. And then Bill just hands you this amazing property, no strings attached." Rachel shrugged. "For someone like your dad, that must have felt like a slap in the face." The insight unlocked memories Emily hadn't examined before, her father's tight expression whenever Grandpa Bill praised her artwork. The way he'd dismiss her creative accomplishments while obsessing over any small business success. His constant reminders that she'd had it easy compared to his own upbringing. "Mom mentioned once that Dad nearly lost everything in his early 30s, Emily said slowly. "Some bad investment that Grandpa had warned him against. Grandpa bailed him out but made him work his way back up in the company. So he has a history of financial mistakes and resentment," Rachel noted. "And your mom?" Emily thought about Victoria Carter, always impeccably dressed, obsessively curating their family image on social media, desperate to be accepted in their wealthy social circle. Mom grew up middle class in Tacoma. Her parents owned a hardware store. Emily remembered fragments of stories her mother rarely shared. "I think she's always felt she had to prove herself worthy of the Carter name, like she's constantly auditioning for a role she already has. So between your dad's financial insecurity and your mom's social climbing, they convinced themselves they deserved that house more than I did," Emily finished. "Or at least deserved the money from selling it." Rachel reached over and squeezed Emily's hand. "Does understanding their motives make you less angry?" "No," Emily admitted. "If anything, it makes it worse. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated betrayal maintained for years." They sat in silence for a while, the implications settling between them like the snow outside, pristine and cold. "What do you think your grandfather will do when he finds out?" Rachel finally asked. Emily had been asking herself the same question all night. William Carter was fair but unyielding when it came to matters of principle. He had built his company and his reputation on transparency and integrity. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think it will break his heart." This was the weight that had been crushing her since yesterday, the knowledge that in exposing her parents' betrayal, she would be destroying her grandfather's faith in his only son. "Maybe there's another way," Rachel suggested. "Maybe you could confront your parents privately, give them a chance to make it right before bringing your grandfather into it." Emily shook her head. "Look, I already tried calling Dad this morning. It went straight to voicemail. And when I texted Mom asking about the house again, she wrote back that I was being dramatic and trying to cause problems before Christmas." Rachel's expression hardened. "Then they've made their choice. Besides," Emily continued, "this isn't just about the house anymore. It's about the 2 years of lies they've told Grandpa Bill, the gifts he thought I received, the messages they claimed to deliver. They've been gaslighting him, Rachel, making him think I was too busy or selfish to include him in this major life event." The realization crystallized her resolve. This wasn't just about what her parents had stolen from her. It was about what they had stolen from her grandfather, his trust, his pride in his granddaughter, the joy he should have felt seeing her in the home he'd provided. "So what's the plan for tomorrow?" Rachel asked. Climax number 1. "I'm going to let them expose themselves," Emily said, echoing Mark Steele's words. "I've asked Sarah to make sure certain documents are in Grandpa's office at the lake house. Mark will arrive during dinner with copies of everything: the original deed, the fraudulent power of attorney, the records tracing the money to Napa." She took a deep breath. "When the moment is right, I'll ask about Pacific Lane. And then we'll see what happens." Rachel studied her friend's face. "Are you sure you want to do it this way at Christmas dinner?" "They've stolen 2 Christmases from me and Grandpa already," Emily said quietly. "There won't be a third." After Rachel left, Emily packed for the overnight stay at her grandfather's lake house. Her fingers lingered on the emerald green dress she'd chosen for dinner, her grandfather's favorite color, the one he always said brought out the fire in her eyes. Tomorrow night, they would need that fire. Her phone rang Grandpa Bill's ringtone. Emily took a deep breath before answering. "Hey, Grandpa. Emmy, just checking you're still on for tomorrow. The roads are clear now, but they're predicting more snow overnight." His voice was so warm, so full of genuine affection that Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'll be there," she promised. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." "That's my girl," he chuckled. "Your parents arrived this afternoon. Your mother's already rearranging my kitchen." Emily winced, imagining Victoria's thinly veiled criticisms of her father-in-law's housekeeping. "Need me to run interference?" No. I've learned to let her busy herself. Keeps the peace." He paused. "Emily, about that surprise I mentioned." Her heart thudded painfully. "Yes. I just want you to know how proud I am of you, making your own way, building your business. You remind me of myself at your age, determined, clear-eyed." Emily gripped the phone tighter. "Grandpa? I know. Save the sentimentality for tomorrow." She could hear the smile in his voice. "Just drive carefully, Emmy. I need my favorite girl in one piece." After they hung up, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, the phone clutched to her chest. For the first time since discovering the truth, she allowed herself to cry for the grandfather who believed in her, for the parents who had betrayed them both, and for the inevitable pain tomorrow would bring. But as the tears subsided, something else took their place, a steely determination. The time for doubt and hesitation was over. Tomorrow the truth would finally come to light. What Emily couldn't know was that her grandfather had been harboring suspicions of his own subtle inconsistencies in Robert's report's evasiveness when Bill asked specific questions about Emily's new home. The seeds of doubt had been planted months ago. In his lakeside study, William Carter hung up the phone and turned to stare out at the snow-covered landscape, his weathered face reflecting decades of hard-won wisdom. Something wasn't right with his son and daughter-in-law, hadn't been right for some time. And tomorrow, one way or another, he intended to find out what they were hiding. The stage was set. The players were in position. And as snow began to fall again over Portland, both Emily and her grandfather prepared in their own ways for a Christmas dinner that would change everything. Yielding snowmen and having snowball fights, their laughter rising in the crisp air. Their joy felt distant, belonging to another world, a world where families told the truth, and Christmas was about togetherness rather than deception. Her phone chimed with a text from Mark Steele. "Documents prepared, will arrive at 6:30. Are you certain about this path?" Emily typed back. "Yes. No more lies." She spent the morning methodically preparing not just for Christmas dinner, but for what would come after. She backed up her freelance work to an external drive, updated her portfolio website, and emailed several potential clients about January projects. If tonight went as she expected, the Carter family would never be the same. She needed to be ready for whatever came next, including the possibility that her parents might retaliate by trying to damage her professional reputation or connections. At noon, she called Sarah again to confirm the final details. "I've placed the folder in Mr. Carter's desk drawer as requested." Sarah said, her voice low, as if afraid of being overheard. "And I've arranged for copies to be made for everyone at the table." "Thank you, Sarah," Emily said sincerely. "I know this puts you in an awkward position." "Your grandfather has been good to me for 10 years, Sarah replied firmly. "I won't stand by while your parents continue to deceive him. It's not right." Just as Emily was about to hang up, Sarah added, "There's something else you should know. Your grandfather asked me some pointed questions yesterday about the Pacific Lane property. I think he may already suspect something isn't right." This was unexpected. "What kind of questions?" "He wanted to see the property tax records which would normally be sent to your address. When I couldn't locate them, he seemed troubled. Then he asked if I'd ever actually spoken to you about the house directly. I told him the truth that I hadn't." Emily's pulse quickened. "Did he confront my parents?" "Not that I'm aware of. But Emily, your grandfather didn't build a real estate empire by being easily fooled. If he's asking these questions now, it's because he's been piecing things together for a while." After hanging up, Emily sat on her couch, mind racing with this new information. If Grandpa Bill already suspected deception, tonight's revelation might be less shocking to him than she'd feared. Perhaps he was even laying his own trap, waiting for the right moment to confront Robert and Victoria. The thought both comforted and unsettled her. She'd been preparing to protect her grandfather from a painful truth, but what if he was actually preparing to protect her? At 3 o'clock, Emily began the drive to Lake Oswego, her overnight bag and carefully wrapped gifts in the back seat. The roads were clear but wet, the temperature hovering just above freezing. As she drove, she rehearsed different scenarios in her mind, trying to anticipate her parents' reactions, their potential excuses or deflections. Would they deny everything? Try to gaslight her in front of Grandpa Bill? Claim it had all been a misunderstanding? Or would they admit the truth, but attempt to justify their actions? Each possibility required a different response, and Emily was determined to be prepared for any tactic they might employ. The element of surprise was on her side. They had no idea she had discovered their deception, no warning of the confrontation to come. As she turned onto the private road leading to her grandfather's lake house, Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Whatever happens tonight, remember who you are. You're not defined by what they did or what they think of you. I love you. Call me anytime." Emily blinked back tears, grateful beyond words for her friend's unwavering support. Then she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and drove the final stretch to the house where everything would change. William Carter's lake house was a stunning testament to his architectural vision, a modern interpretation of a traditional lodge with soaring windows that framed the water and mountains beyond. Stone and timber blended seamlessly with glass and steel, creating a space that felt both grand and intimately welcoming. As Emily pulled into the circular driveway, she noted her parents' sleek black Mercedes already parked near the entrance. Next to it stood her grandfather's more modest Volvo station wagon, practical, dependable, without pretension. The contrast seemed symbolic somehow. Before she could reach for her bags, the front door opened, and Grandpa Bill strode out arms wide, his familiar grin warming his weathered face. At 72, he remained robust, tall, and broad-shouldered, with a full head of silver hair and penetrating blue eyes that missed nothing. "Emmy," he called, hurrying down the steps despite the ice. "You made it." Emily felt a rush of love so powerful it momentarily overwhelmed her anger and determination. This man, this good, honest man who had always believed in her, was the reason she was here. Not revenge against her parents, but justice for him. "Careful, Grandpa," she said, meeting him halfway up the path for a fierce hug. "The last thing we need is you breaking a hip before dinner." He laughed, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "Takes more than a little ice to put me down." He held her at arm's length, studying her face. "You look tired, Emmy. Working too hard." The concern in his eyes nearly undid her. For 2 years, he had believed she was living comfortably in the beautiful house he'd provided, building her design business in the perfect studio space. The reality, her struggling in a leaking apartment, taking on extra clients to make rent, would hurt him deeply. Just busy with end-of-year projects, she said, forcing a smile. Nothing I can't handle. He nodded approvingly, taking her overnight bag from her hands. That's my girl, always the fighter. As they walked into the house, Emily steeled herself for the first encounter with her parents. The interior was warm and fragrant with pine and cinnamon, a massive Christmas tree dominating the great room, its lights twinkling against the early winter dusk. Victoria Carter emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron that Emily knew was just for show. Her mother hadn't actually cooked a meal in years. "Emily, finally!" Victoria exclaimed, air-kissing her daughter's cheeks. "We were beginning to worry you'd been caught in the snow." Emily accepted the performative affection, noting the way her mother's eyes quickly assessed her outfit, looking as always for flaws to mentally catalog and mention later. "The roads were fine," Emily replied evenly. "Where's Dad?" "Business call," Victoria said with a practiced roll of her eyes. "Even on Christmas Eve. You know how it is." Emily did know. Robert Carter had never been able to fully disconnect from work, even during family events. But now she wondered how many of those urgent business calls over the years had actually been about family business manipulations and machinations happening just out of earshot. "Well, he'd better wrap it up soon." Grandpa Bill set his tone light, but with an undercurrent of steel. "I have a strict no-phones rule at Christmas dinner." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I'll remind him." As her mother returned to the kitchen, Emily caught her grandfather watching Victoria with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between sadness and suspicion. "Why don't you get settled in your usual room?" he suggested, handing back her bag. "Dinner's at 6, but I've opened a nice Cabernet that's breathing in the study if you want to join me beforehand." Emily nodded, grateful for the chance to compose herself before facing her father. "I'll be down in 20 minutes. Her usual room was on the second floor, a cozy space with a window seat overlooking the lake. As a child, she had spent countless hours there, drawing the changing light on the water safe in the knowledge that her grandfather's house was a place where she was always accepted, always enough. As Emily hung up her dress for dinner, she heard her father's voice in the hallway, low, urgent, irritated. She moved quietly to the door and opened it just a crack. Robert Carter stood at the end of the hall, his back to her phone pressed to his ear. "I told you it's handled," he was saying. "Bill doesn't suspect anything. Yes, the transfer is complete. No, Emily hasn't said a word about it. She's clueless as always, focused on her little art projects." The dismissive tone, the casual contempt in his voice as he discussed her, it crystallized every doubt, every hurt, every moment of feeling inadequate that Emily had experienced growing up. This was the real Robert Carter, the man behind the facade of supportive father. Emily closed the door silently, a cold certainty settling in her chest. There would be no last-minute doubts, no wavering in her resolve. Tonight she would reclaim not just what had been stolen from her, but her own self-worth. She changed into the emerald dress, applied her makeup with careful precision, and fastened the pearl earrings Grandpa Bill had given her. The woman who stared back from the mirror looked different, somehow stronger, more focused. In 3 hours, Mark Steele would arrive with the final pieces of evidence. In 3 hours, the careful house of lies her parents had built would collapse around them. Emily took a deep breath and headed downstairs to join her grandfather in the study, where a fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the Cabernet waited dark and potent in crystal glasses. The stage was set. The final act was about to begin. The great room of William Carter's lake house glowed with golden light from the chandelier and fire. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, turning the wall of windows into a mirror that reflected the Christmas tree, the elegant table setting, and the 4 people seated around it, a perfect holiday tableau that masked the tension beneath. Emily sat across from her parents, the weight of what was to come pressing on her chest like a stone. She'd spent an hour in Grandpa Bill's study before dinner, sipping Cabernet and making small talk, while stealing glances at the desk drawer that held the folder Sarah had prepared. Her grandfather had seemed preoccupied, his usual warmth present, but overlaid with something watchful. Now, as Victoria passed the roasted potatoes and Robert carved the prime rib with practiced precision, Emily observed her family with new eyes. Her mother's laughter floated around the table like stage smoke, pretty ephemeral without substance. Her father's anecdotes about business associates struck Emily as performative, each story carefully crafted to position himself as the smartest person in every room. "Emily, you're quiet tonight," Victoria remarked during a lull in conversation. "Everything all right with that website project you mentioned?" "Everything's fine," Emily replied, taking a measured sip of wine. Just thinking about the coming year. Changes I want to make. Robert raised an eyebrow. Changes? What kind of changes? There was an edge to his question that hadn't been there before, a wariness that suggested he sensed something different in his daughter tonight. Professional, mostly, Emily said vaguely. Maybe a new workspace. Victoria brightened. That dingy apartment is terrible for your image, darling. We've been saying for ages you should find somewhere more suitable. The casual hypocrisy of the statement made Emily's hand tighten around her wine glass. For 2 years, her parents had known she was living in that dingy apartment, while they pretended to Grandpa Bill that she was comfortably settled in the Pacific Lane house. Actually, Grandpa Bill interjected, I've been meaning to ask about your place, Emmy. I realized I've never actually seen photos of how you've set up the studio space. Emily's pulse quickened. Her grandfather's tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, assessing her reaction. This wasn't an innocent question, this was a test. Before she could respond, Robert cut in smoothly. Bill, you know Emily likes her privacy. She'll show us when she's ready. It's just that Sarah mentioned something odd yesterday. Bill continued, ignoring his son's interruption. About the property tax notices for Pacific Lane. They seem to have gone missing. Victoria's hand slipped her fork, clattering against the fine china. Oh, those notifications are all electronic now, she said quickly. I'm sure Emily has them in her email somewhere. Emily watched her mother's face, fascinated by the rapid calculations she could see happening behind Victoria's eyes, the search for the right lie, the right deflection. Actually, Emily said slowly, I've been wondering about Pacific Lane myself. The room seemed to still as if holding its breath. What do you mean? Robert asked, his voice carefully neutral. I got an interesting email the other day, Emily continued, from Adams and Polk Real Estate, about the successful sale of a property on Pacific Lane, a property apparently once owned by Emily Carter. Twist number 5, the silence that followed was absolute. Emily could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the crackle of the fire, her own heart pounding in her ears. She looked directly at her grandfather as she delivered the final line. The strange thing is, I've never owned a property on Pacific Lane. I've never even been there. Grandpa Bill's face transformed confusion, giving way to dawning realization, then hardening into something Emily had never seen directed at her father before. Anger. What is she talking about, Robert? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Robert's expression shifted through several emotions, surprise, calculation, and finally a tight smile. Dad, this is clearly some misunderstanding. Emily's confused. I'm not confused, Emily interrupted, her voice steady. I spoke to Stephanie Donahue at Adams and Polk, and I drove by the house. 1842 Pacific Lane, a blue-gray Craftsman with white trim and a big front porch. The house you bought for me 2 years ago, Grandpa. The house my parents sold without my knowledge. Victoria made a small, distressed sound. Emily, please, this isn't the time. When is the time, Mom? Emily turned to her mother. After you've lied to Grandpa for another year. After you've intercepted more gifts he thought I was receiving at Pacific Lane. After you've made more excuses for why I never invite him over. Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's enough. You have no idea what you're talking about. Dad, we can explain everything. Can you explain this? Grandpa Bill rose slowly, his movements deliberate as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper. Because I've been trying to understand it myself. He unfolded the document, a bank statement, and placed it on the table. This shows the transfer of funds from the sale of 1842 Pacific Lane into an account supposedly belonging to Emily. An account that was emptied 1 week later with all funds transferred to Carter Family Holdings. His eyes locked onto Robert's. A company I've never heard of registered in your name. Robert paled visibly. Dad, I can explain. We were just managing the property for Emily until she was ready. Stop lying, Robert. Bill's voice cut like a blade. Sarah showed me everything yesterday. The power of attorney documents with Emily's forged signature, the deed transfer, the property sale records. He looked at his son with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. You sold your daughter's house and pocketed the money. Then you lied to me for 2 years, letting me believe she was living there. Climax number 2. The doorbell rang its chime, slicing through the terrible silence. Emily knew without looking that it would be Mark Steele right on time with the final pieces of evidence. Victoria's eyes darted toward the sound, desperate for any interruption. I'll get it, she said, quickly rising. Sit down, Victoria. Grandpa Bill's command was quiet but absolute. I believe that will be Mark. I asked him to join us early tonight. As if on cue, Sarah appeared from the side hallway that led from the kitchen. Without a word, she walked to the front door and admitted Mark Steele, who entered carrying his leather briefcase, his expression grave. Bill, he nodded to his old friend. I see you've already begun the discussion. Robert looked between his father and the attorney, realization dawning. You planned this, he said, accusation in his voice. You and Emily and Mark, you set up this ambush. No, Robert, Bill replied coldly. You set this up the moment you decided to steal from your daughter and lie to me. Mark placed his briefcase on the sideboard and extracted a folder. I've prepared copies of all relevant documents for everyone. The original deed placing the Pacific Lane property in Emily's name, the fraudulent power of attorney used to facilitate the sale, the transfer of funds to Carter Family Holdings. He paused, his gaze resting on Robert. And bank records showing the subsequent purchase of your Napa Valley estate using those same funds. Victoria made a small, choking sound. Robert, she whispered, you said that money came from the Westridge development. Emily watched her mother's face, recognizing genuine shock there. You didn't know Mom about where the money for Napa came from? Victoria's perfectly maintained composure cracked. I knew about selling the house, she admitted, not meeting Emily's eyes. Robert said you weren't ready for that kind of responsibility, that we were protecting you from making financial mistakes. But he told me the money was being invested for your future. She turned to her husband. You said we were building her trust fund. Robert's face flushed with anger. Don't pretend you're innocent in this, Victoria. You were the one who intercepted Bill's gifts. You were the one who kept making excuses for why Emily never invited him over. Because you told me it was temporary, Victoria's voice rose. You said we just needed time to sort out the investment strategy, that we'd explain everything once the returns were secured. Emily felt a strange detachment watching her parents turn on each other. Their carefully curated image of perfect unity dissolved before her eyes, revealing the cracks that had been there all along. Grandpa Bill hadn't moved, his expression hardening as he listened to their accusations and counter-accusations. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but layered with disappointment. I trusted you, Robert. With my company. With my legacy. He looked at Victoria. Both of you with Emily's future. He shook his head slowly. That trust was misplaced. Robert's face shifted, calculation replacing anger. Dad, listen. We made a mistake, I admit that. But we can fix this. We'll sell the Napa property, return the money to Emily. It's too late for that, Bill interrupted. This isn't about the money anymore. It's about what you were willing to do to get it. The lies you told. The way you used Emily's desire for independence against her. He turned to Mark Steele. What are our next steps? The attorney opened another folder. I've drawn up several documents. First, a termination of Robert's position as COO of Carter Development effective immediately. Second, removal of both Robert and Victoria from all company boards and family trusts. Third, a forensic accounting investigation to determine if there have been other irregularities. Robert stood so abruptly that his wine glass toppled, spilling red across the white tablecloth like blood. You can't do this. I've given 20 years to the company. I built half those developments myself. With my money, my connections, and my reputation backing you, Bill replied, unmoved. The reputation you've now damaged with your actions. Victoria reached for her husband's arm. Robert, please, let's not make this worse. Worse, Robert's laugh was bitter. My father and daughter have conspired to destroy everything we've built, and you're worried about making it worse. They didn't conspire against you, Dad, Emily said quietly. Your own actions did this. I only discovered the truth 3 days ago. Robert turned to her, his eyes cold. Always the perfect granddaughter, aren't you? Always so talented, so special. Well, guess what? The real world doesn't care about your little drawings. The real world rewards people who take action, who seize opportunities. Is that what this was? Emily asked. Seizing an opportunity. Stealing my house wasn't enough. You had to steal my relationship with Grandpa, too. You never appreciated what we sacrificed for you, Robert shot back. The summers we spent driving you to art camps instead of focusing on our own needs. The connections I leveraged to get you design clients when you couldn't find work on your own. Each accusation landed like a physical blow, echoing the diminishment Emily had felt her entire life. But instead of shrinking, she found herself growing stronger, more certain. I never asked for those things, she said calmly. I only wanted your support, your belief in me. Instead, you made me feel that nothing I did was ever enough. Victoria began to cry silent tears tracking through her perfect makeup. We only wanted what was best for you, she whispered. No, Emily replied gently. You wanted what was best for your image of me. There's a difference. Grandpa Bill moved around the table to stand beside Emily, his hand resting supportively on her shoulder. I think we're done here for tonight, he said. Robert, Victoria, I suggest you return to the guest house. Tomorrow we'll begin sorting out the legal aspects of this situation. Robert stared at his father, a muscle twitching in his jaw. For a moment, Emily thought he might lash out further. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, an eerie calm settling over him. You'll regret this, he said quietly. Both of you. As he stalked from the room, Victoria hesitated, looking between her husband's retreating back and Emily. Emily, please, she began, but whatever plea she intended died on her lips at the expression on her daughter's face. With a small, defeated nod, Victoria followed Robert the door, closing behind them with a soft final click. The silence that remained felt both heavy and strangely liberating. Emily exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath. Are you all right? Grandpa Bill asked, his voice gentle. Emily nodded, surprised to find that she was. The confrontation that had loomed so terribly in her imagination was over. The truth was out, and while nothing had been resolved, everything had changed. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Bill said, sitting beside her. I suspected something wasn't right, but I never imagined this level of deception. When did you start to doubt their story? Emily asked. Bill sighed heavily. Little things at first. Comments you made that didn't align with what they'd told me about the house. The fact that you never mentioned it in our conversations. Then last week I asked Sarah to find the original property documents and she couldn't locate them. He shook his head. Yesterday I confronted her directly and she told me everything she knew. Mark Steele cleared his throat. Bill, there's still the matter of the house itself. It was sold twice, first to Robert, then to the current owners. Legally untangling that will be complex. But possible, Emily asked. Possible, yes. With the evidence of fraud, we can petition the court to void the original sale. The current owners would need to be compensated, of course, but they could potentially keep the property if they prefer, with you receiving the fair market value. Mark glanced at Bill. It would be cleaner to simply provide Emily with the equivalent funds to purchase a similar property. That's exactly what we'll do, Bill said firmly. First thing tomorrow, I'll transfer the full amount plus 2 years of appreciation into an account in Emily's name. He took her hand. It won't erase what happened, but it's a start. Emily squeezed his hand gratefully. The money isn't what matters to me, Grandpa. It's the truth. It's knowing that you know what really happened. The truth always finds its way to the surface, Bill said, his weathered face lined with both sadness and resolve. No matter how deeply it's buried. The next morning, Christmas Day, Emily woke to the soft pink light of dawn filtering through the window of her childhood room. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, the events of the previous night washing over her. The confrontation, the revelations, the sight of her parents leaving, defeated but unrepentant. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. Emmy, are you awake? Grandpa Bill's voice called. Come in, she replied, sitting up against the pillows. He entered carrying a tray with coffee and freshly baked cinnamon rolls, his face tired but calm. Merry Christmas, he said simply. Merry Christmas, Grandpa. She accepted the mug he offered, breathing in the familiar aroma. Did you sleep at all? Not much, he admitted, settling into the window seat. Too much thinking to do. Through the window behind him, Emily could see the lake, its surface shimmering in the early morning light. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland that seemed at odds with the turmoil of their family. They left before dawn, Bill said, following her gaze toward the guest house. Didn't say goodbye. Emily nodded, unsurprised. What happens now? Legally, Mark will handle the corporate aspects, removing Robert's access, securing the company assets, notifying the boards. Bill sighed deeply. Personally, I don't know. That depends partly on them, partly on us. Do you think they'll try to fight the changes? Robert might. He's never been good at accepting consequences. Bill's expression turned thoughtful. But he's also practical. He knows challenging me publicly would damage his reputation in the industry. My guess is he'll negotiate privately, try to salvage what he can. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping coffee and watching the first rays of sun glint off the snow. Finally, Bill reached into his pocket and extracted a small velvet pouch. "This was meant to be your Christmas gift," he said, passing it to her. "But in light of everything, it seems even more appropriate now." Emily opened the pouch and tipped a silver key into her palm. Unlike a modern house key, it was ornate and clearly antique with an intricate pattern etched into its surface. "What is this for?" she asked, turning it over in her hand. "Freedom," Bill replied simply. "It's the key to a different house, one on Maple Avenue, not far from Pacific Lane. I purchased it last month, thinking it might be time for you to upgrade from your first home." He smiled wryly. "Little did I know you never had that first home at all." Emily stared at him, stunned. "You bought me another house, even believing I already had one." "I wanted you to have options," he explained. "The Maple Avenue property has an excellent studio space and a separate apartment you could rent out for additional income. I thought it might be a good next step for your business." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as the full meaning of his gesture sank in. Even thinking she was already established, her grandfather had continued to plan for her future, to support her dreams. Climax number 3. "It's yours," Bill continued. "No strings, no intermediaries. The deed is already in your name, held in trust with Mark, as executor, not Robert. No one can take it from you this time." Emily closed her fingers around the key, its weight solid and real in her palm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for this, but for believing in me. For always seeing me clearly." Bill's eyes crinkled with warmth. "You know, when you were little, maybe 5 or 6, I asked what you wanted to be when you grew up. You said, 'I want to be someone who makes beautiful things that make people happy.' Not an artist, not a designer, someone who creates beauty and joy." He reached out to cup her cheek. "You've become exactly that person, Emmy, with or without a house, with or without my help." Later that day, after exchanging the few gifts that seemed important, now books a hand-knitted scarf, Emily had made a vintage sketchbook Bill had found in London, they drove together to the Maple Avenue property. The house was smaller than the one on Pacific Lane, but it had character and charm that resonated with Emily immediately. A Victorian painted lady with a wide front porch and gingerbread trim, it stood on a corner lot surrounded by mature maple trees. "The neighbor told me these trees turn the most incredible gold in fall," Bill commented as they walked up the path. "Said it feels like walking through liquid sunshine." Emily smiled at the description, already imagining how that light would filter through the tall windows, how it would transform her artwork in different seasons. The key turned smoothly in the lock. As the door swung open, Emily caught her breath. The entryway opened to a large open space with hardwood floors, a brick fireplace, and built-in bookshelves. But what made her heart swell was the back wall, entirely glass, looking out on a small garden where a stone path wound between dormant flower beds and an ancient Japanese maple. "The previous owner was an artist too," Bill explained, watching her face. "She designed the studio addition specifically for Northern Light. There's a separate entrance for clients, and the basement has been converted into a one-bedroom apartment with its own access." Emily moved through the space in wonder, trailing her fingers along the mantel, testing the smooth glide of pocket doors that separated the living area from a cozy dining room. Each room revealed new details to delight her: vintage light fixtures, original woodwork, clever built-ins that maximized the space. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to face her grandfather. "It's more than perfect." "It's yours," he replied simply. "No one else's, just yours." That evening, back at the lake house, Emily sat with Bill in his study, both of them lost in thought, as they watched snow begin to fall again, delicate flakes swirling against the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," she said finally, "about forgiveness." Bill glanced at her, eyebrows raised. "For your parents?" "Maybe someday," she admitted. "Not now, but I don't want to let what they did define me or my future relationships." "Wise thinking," he nodded. "Anger serves its purpose. It protects us, motivates us to seek justice, but it makes for poor long-term company." "Did you ever imagine this is how we'd spend Christmas?" Emily asked, trying to lighten the mood. Bill's laugh held both sadness and genuine amusement. "I've learned to expect the unexpected in life, Emmy. The question isn't whether storms will come, they always do. The question is what remains standing afterward." As she looked at her grandfather, his integrity unshaken, despite his son's betrayal, his generosity undiminished by disappointment, Emily knew what would remain standing in her own life. Not anger or vengeance, but the core values he had demonstrated throughout: honesty, courage, and the importance of creating beauty even after heartbreak. 1 week later, Emily stood on the porch of her new home on Maple Avenue, watching the moving truck pull away. Rachel stood beside her, both of them holding steaming mugs of coffee against the January chill. "So," Rachel said, bumping Emily's shoulder gently with her own, "how does it feel to be a homeowner for real this time?" Emily took in the quiet street, the winter sunlight gilding the bare branches of the maple trees, the solid weight of the house key in her pocket. A sense of peace settled over her, not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. "It feels like the beginning," she said simply. And it was. A beginning built not on deception, but on truth. Not on appearances, but on substance. Not on what had been stolen, but on what had been freely given, and what she had fought to reclaim: her dignity, her future, her sense of home. As Emily stepped across the threshold of her new house, keys in hand and possibilities stretching before her, she whispered to herself the truth she had finally fully embraced. "I am enough. I have always been enough." Justice didn't always shout. Sometimes it simply opened a door and invited you to walk through it, head held high into the light of a new day.